Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me with End of Life Conversations and Reflections today. My guest is Zara Kanji. She is a businesswoman, a CPA, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a cancer warrior, and a really good friend of mine. Thank you, Zara, for joining me today and having this conversation around end of life.
Thank you. And thank you for having these conversations. They're hard conversations. And before we started this call, I did say, and I want to reiterate that you are brave and courageous and resilient, and you have this enormous strength in you to serve humankind with your compassion. So thank you for that too, Zara.
Oh no, it's an honor to be honestly to be talking to you and having people like you come forward and have these conversations so that people don't hide behind their fear and are able to just normalize the experience. So we have a long way to go, but I think this is going to really be interesting, and I'm going to be hopefully interviewing some people that are going to shed light on different things around end of life. So yeah, so today I was actually hoping to just start with asking you about when you were growing up, like what was your understanding of death and dying? And did you have an experience as a child around a death?
Now, most of death revolved around the mayats that we went to for Kani. And back home, which is what I remember, everyone went to all the mayats. There weren't very many of them.
Well, yeah.
So they were just mayats in Jamaat Khana. And in back home, I don't know if you remember, Zara, but where I come from, people used to wail. They would wail.
Yes.
Over death, and it was a very unnerving experience. It was somewhere where you wanted to stay away from it. The smells, the sounds, they weren't good. So not a good identifier for death, growing up around it.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah, and I still have like some memory of that within my own family. And this in some cultures that's really the norm and the accepted way of grieving, and it would be abnormal not to grieve that way. But I feel like having come to Canada, things have shifted a little bit in that there isn't the wailing that would be not considered normal within our customs anymore.
Yeah.
But I guess that might have put a bit of fear around going to a funeral for you then, or did you continue to go to funerals when you were young?
I think my mom stopped taking us because we would just be ridden with fear.
Right.
It was just not a pleasant experience. So I remember going to family funerals. And of course, we weren't allowed to go to the graveyards, but that was even scarier. Graveyards were the scary place because and it was just a constant fear around death and everything to do with death, and depicted extremely negatively, growing
Yeah.
up, what I remember.
Yeah, women not being allowed to go to the graveyard always kind of made me wonder why. And I know it's a religious thing, but I thought when my dad died, I was going to go no matter what. But actually, when it came down to it, I decided that's not that's not a battle I want to fight. But yeah, certainly some of those customs can play into our sort of fears and anxieties around death and dying.
Yeah. No.
So I'm also curious to know, like, have you had a life experience that has brought you face to face with your own mortality?
So a lot of people would consider that because I'm a cancer survivor, that brought me in touch with or made me question mortality. Actually, it wasn't cancer that did it. I would say it was after that, and it was a process of maybe 3 or 4 years after that, because my cancer in itself wasn't something I was scared of the entire time. It was very much here's a lemon, turn it into a very hard Mike's Hard Lemonade, drink it and get over it. Which was good at that time. In hindsight, I was a much stronger person then. I was very logical and realistic. And I had very little emotional connection too much. It was post that, and it was the experience of seeing that, okay, there's why do you live, that I kind of questioned my mortality. And at that time, I don't think even then I was scared of dying, but the question of death was in my mind. How would I deal with it?
So just going back to your diagnosis, I definitely think you make lemonade out of lemons. That's you for sure. Because my memory of you when you were in my hood, I remember you came in decked out, you know, to the nines. You had your hair done, your makeup done, your heels on. And I asked you what you were doing in my hood, and you said you were going to the cancer agency for some treatment. And I was really shocked because you obviously didn't take on the role of a patient. You looked like you were going to a party. And I remember you making your appointments more about I don't know if it was like a celebration, but it was more like you went in there with a completely different mind frame. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, certainly. So I definitely didn't want to feel like the victim.
Yeah.
I didn't like the idea of being victimized, making myself a victim. And I started, it obviously started with me. I felt like I had to not feel like a victim. So yeah, it was a great time of connecting with friends and realizing that people actually love you without your hair, without all the things that you identify as being you. And so I would go in there and I'd make it into a time for my girlfriends to come visit. Sometimes I'd put Mendy on my chemo hand.
Oh,
So I'd
okay.
celebratory. My girlfriends would come, they'd bring, Cosmo magazines and sit with me and we'd laugh, just joke around. We actually had to be careful not to be too happy because there were people in there that weren't so happy. So it was I really didn't think of cancer as a morbid time, and it wasn't really the cancer that was hurting. It was the therapy. And incidentally, I really don't understand why we still use chemo. I think it's so antiquated, but that's a conspiracy theory we won't go into. But yeah, it helped me connect. It helped me celebrate. Until that point, I had concentrated so hard on doing all the things you're expected to do, work, career, building an empire, that I had forgotten to live. And that really made me pause and consider, why am I living? Why am I living?
Yeah.
And so it actually, more than morbidly putting me face to face with my mortality, it helped me want to enjoy living.
I certainly saw that. I mean, I saw that in action. It's not very often you see someone coming in kind of because you were connecting with your friends and you were so supported and you'd kind of planned this event around your treatment that kind of took you away from just the treatment aspect of it. You were looking at other ways to embrace what was going on. And that I'll never forget because that was something that really resonated with me. And I thought, gosh, if ever I was in that situation, I want to be able to handle myself that way. It was so
Once the steroids too, remember.
right.
By the third day, it wasn't so hot. I didn't look so hot.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cancer, and I know we want to talk about death and dying, but just because you posted a picture of yourself bald on Facebook, I was just curious, like what went through your head? Like, was that difficult to do? Or was that something that just came to you as, okay, well, this was my journey and I'm sharing it? Really curious about how you got to the point where you just, because I know that most people would be quite subconscious to do that, but you quite openly celebrated that, it looked like.
So yeah, that I did it on purpose because I wanted to get over that fear.
Right.
Because you go out through life and you identify yourself with identify with your hair. I am my hair. I am a CPA. I am. And so I really wanted to get into, I am not all the things that I've identified with, and I'm okay with who I am. And it took a lot of courage. That was hard. That was harder than feeling sick. That was harder than the nausea. And it is so superficial, but yet that was the hardest part.
No,
And
and
I
I mean, I
when you
can't
think of
imagine.
dying and death, that suffering is the hardest part. Going through death and the end of life, and the
Yeah,
things that, and a lot of old people talk about that too, is all of a sudden they are not who they've always identified with. And I
right.
think getting over that is harder than coming to the realization that this is the end of your life. It's everything you've always identified with, who
Yeah.
you usually identify with, what you do as a career or the accolades you've received or your beauty. If you take all that away, who are you? When it comes to death, it's just you and who surrounds you then.
So would it be an interesting exercise for all of us to kind of strip all that away, and do an exercise around? I mean, it's really hard. Like, I'm actually turning gray. Like, since I was 16, I've been turning, and I'm trying to let the gray out. And it's so difficult because I identify with my dark hair. And I feel like I'm going through a bit of a crisis because I'm like, and I am going through that same thing where I'm like, am I my hair? Like, who am I? Am I this, or am I what's inside me? And it sounds like your journey was really interesting in that you kind of just out there, bald picture. Like, who does that? Who has that kind of courage? Like, oh my God, like, so inspiring.
A lot of cancer patients do that actually, and I think it's more of the realization that you are more than everything you've identified yourself with until that point.
And I understand your treatment was quite gruesome as well. Like, did you have a lot of side effects, and how did you cope with all that?
Yes, the side effects of cancer, not cancer, but chemo are gruesome. That's the hardest part. It's the side effects. It's you're sick for months. Um, to that extent, how did I get through it? When I was, it was usually over a 2 week period. I'd be really sick for about 3 or 4 days, sometimes 5 days. And what I would do is you would just breathe through the moments.
Right.
And Ativan.
Okay. Good to know.
Ativan. Friends coming over, trying to help you, just move past that moment, because you just have to get through those moments that are terrible.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's kind of like, if you want to think of a metaphor, it's just, if you're walking up a mountain and you're running out of breath, you're just 1 foot after, you're concentrating on the little steps as long as you're moving forward, right? And you move past that moment essentially. But yeah.
Yeah. So when you were given your diagnosis, like, what went through your mind? Do you remember what went through your head? Do you remember the exact moment? Like, were you thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fight this? Or were you thinking, oh my God, am I gonna die? Like, what was going through your mind? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember vividly. What I remember was, what do I need to do to get past this? There was no sense of, I need to fight this and I'm going to make a statement out of it. It was very logical. It was very based in reality. It was, give me the news, tell me what I need to do to get over it, and give me a prognosis. And even at that time, I remembered, if the prognosis at that time would have been, okay, you're more terminal than not, I would have probably, knowing me at that time, just taken it in stride and said, okay, how do I then put my ducks in order to die? That's
Yeah.
exactly what I would have done. I would have just been very methodical about it and said, okay, I'm dying, so now what do I do to get from point A to point B, to make it as easy as possible for me and the people around me.
Yeah.
I think it would, even if it would have been a morbid diagnosis, I would have probably just said, okay, this is the time I have to enjoy. This is the time I have to say goodbye. It would have been really sad for the people around me, But knowing who I was back then, I would have just been very realistic about it and
Yeah.
just accepted it.
Yeah, you definitely are the person that makes the most of every situation, having known you for years. You mentioned that there was the thing around death came about for you a few years after your diagnosis. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and increasingly so, and we talked about this a little about my dad. I think it came more after watching my dad go through being an old man and really wanting life to be over.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah, expressed that.
sorry,
Your dad expressed he wanted his life to be over?
yeah, he was done. His quality of life had diminished significantly. He wasn't enjoying any of life's pleasures. He was constantly in pain. His mobility was insignificant, and so he really wasn't enjoying living. And that's when my perception around death really changed to from something that you want to stay away from or ignore or accept under the worst limited circumstances to why are we so scared of it?
Yeah. So
What
yeah.
right?
Yeah, why? Why are we so scared? Do you have any fears about death and dying?
Not anymore.
Not
Not
any.
anymore. And if I was to take it back to when I was diagnosed with cancer, I would have said, even at that time, the only regret I would have had is that, I had a teenage daughter. So I would have liked to have seen her reach adulthood. But beyond that, I don't think I would have had any other um, regret from dying or why am I dying? Why me?
Yeah.
Seeing my dad go through this process, um, it made me realize that, you know, I think we've moved from this idea of let's help people live
Mm-hmm.
to let's avoid death. There's
Mm-hmm.
a difference. Let's help people live with proper quality of life,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to let's just avoid death at all costs. And I feel like that's what, as a society, that's what we've moved into is avoid death.
Right.
Even if it means no quality of life, that you're going to suffer after you've been given a new take, a new heart, a new liver, that we're trying to stop death and we're not concentrating on living.
Right. Yeah. So because your dad was done, my kid expressed that he had lived his life. He was happy with it going into the next phase of his or next phase of his existence, whatever happens after we die. Did that make it any easier for you, like knowing that he was okay with it? Do you think that impacted your grieving in any way or your acceptance of it in any way?
Oh yes. I mean, I don't grieve my dad's death at all. I was very happy for him. It really turned from, and I think that was the difference, is until that point, I always looked at death as something that I would lose out on. If death came, whether
Yeah.
to me, then I'd be losing out because I'd no longer be alive. If death came to one of my family members, it would be they would no longer be part of my life. So it was always about me being scared of losing something.
Right.
With my dad and seeing my dad go through it, I really saw it as you're giving them the gift of peace and release.
Hmm.
It was no longer about me anymore.
Yeah.
It was
Wow.
about making it, yeah. So, and then it just evolved into, it had more scope after his death, to the extent that I saw death as a release, as a peaceful end. And I really look at it as young, old, sick, healthy. If death comes, embrace it and be at peace with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm okay. The
Yeah.
only one I have a really, really, really hard time with is my daughter. It's really hard to accept your children dying before you do. But
Yeah. I can imagine as a mother, that's the last thing you would want to think about ever.
but that would be a little harder to swallow. But again, I would try to convince myself that she was at peace and she was released.
So on that note, like what do you think happens after you die? Like what are your hopes about what happens after you die?
Oh, well, I strongly believe that we are released. Um, Life is made up of the yin and yang, where there's suffering and good, and it's always in balance. If one day you've suffered, then the next day you will have a better day. Or if one moment was hard, the next moment will be easier. It's always going to be the case. So I think with death, that tandem stops existing. And so you're on
Mm-hmm.
an even plane of just peace.
It's a
Of
lovely
release. You
thought.
don't have that volatility of the yin and yang anymore.
Yeah. Has your dad or has anyone ever that's died ever come to you like in energetically, or have you ever felt anyone's presence or had a dream about them that made you think they were around you?
Yeah, my dad. My dad used to, because I think my dad was really worried about my mom, about leaving my mom. So I would constantly feel him. And there was always this encouraging, I could feel this encouraging presence to go be with my mom, to look after my mom. And I did. Um, After my father passed away, I had this need to be with my mom constantly. And I think it came from him. I don't feel him anymore, but the first year after his death, I felt him a lot. Not in a weird way or a creepy way, in a very polite, persuasive, encouraging way. But it was definitely a felt presence.
You know, a lot of people that lose a loved one wish they feel them around. So it sounds like it was a blessing for you to have him around you for another year after, until he felt things were okay, it sounds like.
Yeah, no,
Um,
he doesn't come.
yeah. Um, so having been through this, you know, cancer journey, having lost your dad, and maybe had other experiences around death and dying, do you feel like there's something you've changed about your life and how you live because of the experiences you've had?
Yes, I think I have definitely had a shift. Cancer kind of, you're familiar with tarot and the upside down hangman.
Mhm.
So that's what happens. You're hung upside down. Everything changes, and everything that you know and relate to changes, and you're forced to look at it critically to decide, hey, what is important? What am I doing here?
Yeah.
How are these little things important? So there was a shift, definitely, to identify what was important, why I was living, what I was living for.
Hmm.
So that shift to living for what I liked to live for definitely came. I decided that my family, connecting with friends, was of utmost importance to me. It's what drove me. It's what made me happy. So that shifted, and but I must say that I still struggle with it, because as much as that's what I like to live for, I don't always put as much attention to that. I am also very focused on work, and it drives me. So I try to balance. It's the typical Libra thing. I'm always balancing.
What I remember from our time together is that having traveled with someone is a very challenging thing because it can make or break a relationship or a friendship. And having been with you in Portugal, all I know is that you just seem to go with the flow, and you were just in the moment, and you were just taking it minute by minute, day by day. And you seem to be that kind of person that just kind of goes with the flow. And I don't know if that's how you are now because of you, or have you always been that way? But I always was like, I need to learn from you, because you just sort of like, yeah, just let's go with it. And then things just kind of work out when you don't stress, because you're in the flow. You're not resisting it. You're kind of just, okay, if it goes
You
that
don't
way,
build
go that way.
expectations to be disappointed.
Sorry?
You don't build expectations to be disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not like that professionally. I'm Jekyll and Hyde between my personal and my professional life. So I'm very controlled, very on top of things, a little too much, a little too controlling professionally. But I disconnect. As soon as I'm done work, I disconnect and I become personal Zara and say, everything goes now. So
Yeah. I really enjoy that part of you, because I mean, you were like, when you go to sleep, you're out, you're done. And I
Yes.
really admire that, because you're like, put in 1,000%, and then when you're done, you're done. And that's what I saw.
Yeah, I can
And
follow.
yeah,
The key is not to worry when you put your head down, is to empty your mind.
God, I need to learn that from you for sure. Yeah, so thank you so much for taking time out of, I know you're extremely busy, but really appreciate you taking the time out to share your story and to like connect with me so that people can feel more comfortable talking about their journey. I
I
yeah,
think very important work you're doing. I think people need to have just a little tiny shift in how they view death, and
yeah,
just to add a little bit more positivity around it, so that the thought of it doesn't freeze them in fear, which is what happens.
yeah, and I wish I knew who said this, but a miracle is a shift in perception. So if we can just shift our perceptions a little bit, I guess my hope is just that people have a more positive experience.
And you're making those strides, Zara. You are making those strides.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. Like, you're always there when I ask you to support something. So thank you so much.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay.